Okay, welcome. So I'm going to give a little introduction to the four immeasurables. And four immeasurables are part of the Mahayana tradition. Most people know the Mahayana tradition by the Zen tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, also primarily based in the Mahayana tradition. And the four immeasurables, which are equanimity, loving kindness, compassion, and joy, are sometimes talked about as higher emotions. And by that, I think higher is a funny way to talk about it, but what it really means is that they're an experience of being able to be present in strong emotion and in any kind of experience with the quality of, say, equanimity. And the quality of equanimity is no bias, and the quality of loving kindness is warmth, and the quality of compassion is presence, really, or presence, that you're not alone. And the quality of joy is freedom. So those are, in fact, natural qualities of human beings. They're not actually outside of us, but in our general day-to-day realm, we obscure those sort of higher emotions with our personal agenda, with our ego agenda. So we don't necessarily notice our equanimity because we're busy noticing our preferences. And we don't notice our loving kindness because we're busy shutting down to what happens around us. Or we don't notice our compassion because we think that we have to fix things or help things, that they're not okay the way they are. And we don't notice our joy because we're caught up in wishing that things were different than they are. So by doing this type of practice, we actually increase our capacity to be with what arises in our lives, increase our capacity to be with others, and we have more capacity to respond rather than react to what occurs. The ego structures are basically reactive. They are sort of like reflex level, primal level. This happens, I do this. Somebody touches me, I move away, or I move towards, or I don't care, usually. But in this type of practice, we begin to be able to respond in an aware way to what happens, right? So that's, again, cultivating that capacity through doing this type of practice. And all of these experiences are experiences rather than thoughts. They're not intellectual experiences. They're naturally arising. So when we do the practice, we're not gonna try to think about them. We're gonna try to reflect, which is a little more neutral in quality, and I'll say more about that in each of the, as we go through them, I'll say more about how that works. But this type of practice in sort of historical context wasn't introduced until somebody had already developed the capacity to sort of be in their own experience fully. But the times of our lives have changed, you could say, and there's a sort of deep need for people to manifest this kind of stability. And in the world, as it's increasing in its turbulence and chaos, we have to find a way to manifest more stability in our own lives. So I think this type of practice is more and more timely and more important. And one of the sort of inspirations for offering this type of presentation is that we're actually saying it's accessible at any time. You don't have to wait until you get better at it. You could tap in to that source of spontaneously arising compassion or spontaneously arising warmth or equanimity or joy at any time. Once you have that experience, then you can actually tap into it. So I think it's amazing that people recognize the need, and then that they actually begin to practice in this way, and sort of profoundly alters the way that we interact with other people. And of course, that's how we change the world. So that's really great. And so the other thing I want to say about doing this type of practice is that it's based on the willingness to observe our own minds in a neutral way, and actually to be honest and notice what is coming up for us and be willing to see it regardless of what it is, because lots of times stuff comes up that we would prefer it wasn't coming up. We'd prefer that it wasn't our experience. But in fact, if we can let whatever comes up be our experience, then it becomes a great path and a great teacher. So key for doing this type of contemplative practice is to actually allow yourself to see and feel what's arising in you. And these meditations are very provocative in that way, because they utilize emotional energy. So whenever we utilize emotional energy, it's a little bit like stepping into the ocean on a windy day, right? The ocean is always the ocean, full of water, but on a day where there's a lot of wind, there's going to be waves, and there's going to be more activity. So by doing this type of practice, we're actually purposefully engaging more wind, more change, more water, more volume, you could say. We're turning up the volume. So a lot of times doing this type of practice increases the volume in our own experience of those experiences that are obscuring the immeasurable, rather than the immeasurable itself in the beginning. So that's just important to give yourself that reminder that it isn't likely in the first few times that you do it that you're going to feel the way you wish you would. And it's important that you don't make yourself think that you feel differently than you do, but that in fact you can expect to experience more prejudice when you're doing equanimity practice, and more shutting down when you're doing loving kindness practice, and more superiority probably when you're doing compassion practice, and more competitiveness when you're doing the practice of joy in this way. You can expect that, so you just expect it, and then when it occurs, you won't be surprised, and you'll realize that means you're actually doing the practice. That when you're actually doing this practice, you will encounter the things that are obscuring that natural arising in you, and that's not a bad thing, and it doesn't make you a bad person, and it doesn't hurt anybody. And that's important to remember, that when you do this type of practice, and we're gonna go through imagining people and imagining them being a certain way, and it doesn't hurt them. This is the great thing about your meditation cushion. It's a neutral zone. It doesn't emanate out and hurt anybody, and it's going to, in the end, benefit everyone and you. So though sometimes it provokes fear in people when they experience that, you can know that fear is natural, and then you can also remind yourself that it's okay. You won't hurt anybody doing this at all. So, all right. Yeah, I think that might be all I want to say for now. Not as long as I thought, but we can stop for now.